Camera rolling. Camera set. Action.
Good morning, Dr. Enrico Melson.
Good morning.
Welcome on behalf of your audience here on YouTube. We welcome you again to once more hear from you the overview and the definition of the 7 pillars of integral education meta-systems. We are now up to the 3rd pillar, education for development. Thank you, Dr. Enrico Melson.
Thank you. Development. It's useful to begin with sort of an inside-outside apposition, not opposition, apposition, things which are side by side one another rather than conflicting with one another. With respect to this notion of development, we know that an individual has so many aspects of self. We've identified in the first of the segments the 8 dimensions of being. That's not all inclusive. There are many other perspectives, many other aspects, facets of being. So when we speak of the developmental process of a person, then we are speaking of a progression, a shift, a flow, and a change, and a synthesis that is undertaken for so much of this myriad panoply of aspects of being. So the development process, therefore, is not something to be left to chance. It's not something to be considered as default simply by virtue of what the prevailing social cultural values are and the family dynamics and the other material circumstances which befall a person in the course of their life, particularly during their developmental years. No, it is not enough for that. It is enough only in the context of a society that wants to take a perspective of creating automatons for its functionality. This is not for creating a truly rich and enriching environment for growth and development of a whole being. We know this for surely. Therefore, education for development of a person is also, by its very nature, to encompass a risk, so to speak, that in the course of that person's development, they may come to have a sense of values and a sense of perspectives and a sense of opinions, which may at times be somewhat oppositional to that of the societal hierarchies, the societal mechanisms. Indeed, if we are not willing to foster the evolution of healthy rebels, then we will be stifling development. All societies need such, but we need that in a harmonious balance with wisdom, with compassion, with emulation rather than competition, with support and service, with universal caring. Then when we develop that rebellious dimensional slice of our character, it is because we are committed to not allow ourselves to fall into complacency. It is because we want change because we care so much. And because we know that when we are considering and when we are germinating this sense of change, these creative ideas, that these creative ideas for change, which may disrupt much of the status quo at times, that such creative ideas are indeed congruent with, consistent with, and promotive of these other values, which are the values that have become inculcated, imprinted, nurtured, particularly as we have described them through the process of the education of the whole person, i.e. through the first of the pillars. oh, I'm sorry, it's just as present at the second pillar, through the process of empowerment. For indeed, how can one raise a voice for change if one does not feel a sense of power, a sense of self-confidence, a sense of indeed caring enough for the collective, that the collective opinion and the collective perspective and the collective service and contribution would indeed bring about, through a mechanism of collectivity, of power itself, indeed that greater evolution of the system. And so what we see then is that in this integral systems and metasystems approach, that in fact, as we're discussing the education of and for development, we are indeed recapitulating aspects of the other integral pillars. This is in fact what constitutes the dynamic application of integrality itself. So the education for development, that's on the internal level. We can see the character, the emotional mastery, not emotional sterility, not emotional domination, emotional mastery. That psycho-emotional alignment and the cultivation of attention and intention. That these are aspects of the inner self, we can say, in development. And as we switch over into that appositional counterpart of what we're calling the external environment, the education for development, what else does the society need in an aggregate way, in a sectoral way, vis-a-vis its economic development requirements, its social infrastructural development requirements, its needs for harmonization of the global citizenry. In fact, whenever there is change, whenever there is evolution, that is going to affect the overall fabric of society, it must by its nature become present, and quickly present, in the systems of education themselves. And so we know then that the external layer, so to speak, of the education for development is also something which must be continuously revising itself, something which must be continuously evolving, and which must be continuously gauging itself and being measured as to the extent of its social relevance, as to the extent of its effectiveness, as to the extent of its safety, that it can be carried about in a harmonious way, not simply to benefit the humanity, the ecosystem overall, the entirety of the ecosystem. We know that, unfortunately, has been the case throughout our so-called modern history, that much of development that has come about in society and civilization has been the development that has also had injurious consequences and alternatives to the environment itself, for example, or that has been education that has brought about certain elements of development, yet those elements of development have sometimes, and many times indeed, widened the gaps of access and quality of life, creating underclass, in fact permanent underclasses in many cases, have brought about, in fact, more oppression and opprobrious living conditions for the masses of people, while such developments have brought about an enhancement of the quality of life for minorities of people, those who would gain the rewards at the expense of the masses. Education for development, therefore, is not to repeat those kinds of patterns. Education for development, therefore, is to bring about the kinds of constructive, promotive, indeed harmonious solutions, which are not condemnatory of the mistakes of the past, and which are also not evading the recognition and denying the rightful appreciation for so much of those antecedent developments and developmental milestones of society, even though accompanying many of them were also difficult consequences, injurious consequences. Nonetheless, education for development also means bringing about that wholeness of perspective so that we can see and have a greater appreciation of the pro and the con, so to speak, of the light and the dark together. This gives us a holistic view. This indeed is an integral perspective. Thus, education for development itself brings about integrality of perspective and consciousness. Again, how we perceive information, activity around us, how we process that. This is functioning at higher levels of intelligence. Thus, the education of development of the inner self, that quality of character, that emotional mastery, is also a way of developing us such that we are not slaves to harsh judgment, even the harsh judgment that we have so frequently levied against those who have implemented injurious systems. Now is no longer the time to march about decrying, denigrating, insulting and assaulting those who have made errors. In fact, it is the time to promote the greater unity, the greater harnessing of collective wisdom, collective intelligence, the collective spirit, the collective unity, so that what we are truly developing is a society that continually advances and advances along these lines of harmony and unity. This is what evolution is for. This is what society is for. This is what a republic is for. In the original Latin words, res publica, the thing of the people. We are indeed developing along these ways when we are implementing the meta-systems of the 7 pillars of integral education. Again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this is useful.
Thank you, Dr. Enrico Melson, once again, on behalf of your audience here, viewing, your training, and the lectures. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.